Right, today we're going to talk about decision making in a crisis. And for me, this is a bit almost like the sort of, if you're in the sort of disaster management, business continuity, crisis management world, to me, this is almost like the sort of the holy grail of the kind of that kind of world, because actually you can have plans and you can have all this sort of wraparound. But in the end, if you make poor decisions during a crisis, then all that sort of preparation or not preparation, you can make some cracking good decisions in a crisis with no preparation and you may get away with it. But in the end, if you make poor decisions, you're going to have bad outcomes. And if it is, in a crisis, that could cause a major impact in your organization, or it may cause the end of your organization. So for me, the sort of decision making is that sort of holy grail of the crisis management business continuity world. And as part of doing this series of lockdown learning was to kind of take the opportunity for those of you maybe furloughed or those that just wanted to do some more learning. One of our aims was to kind of one of my aims of doing is to kind of democratize business continuity. I think sometimes, especially those in the consultant world, try and keep this as some great dark art and some great science, and you need to do 25 years, or you need to be in the army, or need to have, this kind of this background. And a lot of what this is common sense, but there is also a process wrapped around it. So sort of my aim of doing a lot of these webinars is to say, said to the readers out there, this is not difficult. You need to understand it, but actually what I want to do is try to get this out to the sort of mass people, as opposed to kind of keep it in the clique or keep it in the consultancy and say, oh, you can only have it or do it if, pay me lots of money. So the idea is to democratize this. And what I want to do is talk through some of the aspects here of decision making. And I want to talk about decision making as to try and sort of challenge your assumptions about what is crisis decision making, and then try and give you a model, a nice simple model, because I like nice simple models, of how you can look at decision making and what are the elements of it. So what I'm on my agenda today, I'm going to talk about the difficulties of strategic decision making. So what are going to be facing you, or maybe even facing you in the moment as your organizations respond to COVID, is what are going to be the difficulties in making decisions. And I want to challenge this idea of crisis management decisions and actually break them down and say, actually, what are they? And I'm hoping to challenge your ideas of what is a crisis decision making. And maybe kind of a lot of people is that's a CEO making this kind of, they're not going to make the decision, do I cut the black wire, do I cut the red wire on the bomb which is ticking down? But they're making sort of similar binary decisions, some major decisions at a high level. And I want to challenge that assumption. I want to actually talk about a little bit, which a lot of sort of decision making, when you speak about it or read about it, is actually about how the physical decision is made. So how do you make a decision when you can go through a process to make the decision, but sooner or later you have to go and say, is it X or is it Y, or is it cutting the red wire, cutting the white, cutting the blue wire? You've got to make that decision in the end. And then I want to just put together a model or an idea of what you can use. And I say very much democratizing and not trying to make it over complex. So these are what I see as the difficulty. If you read anything on decision making on crises, one of the things they'll always talk about is the sort of difficulties with decision making during crises. So going through it, there's high stakes. So if you make the wrong decision, you could end up being sacked, or it could be the demise of your organization or have a major impact on your organization. So those decisions you made can be really important. And if you're time limited and time pressured and with a limited information, it makes that decision much more difficult to make. So you've got these high stakes, you haven't got all the information. You might have to say, look, boss, CEO, whatever you like to call them, look, we need to make a decision now. We can't wait. The media is at the door, or the guys on the front line need a decision made on this. We can't wait any longer. So those bit. I think with this idea of limited information is, you don't have full situational awareness, and actually some of the information may not come out that is pertinent, may not come out for hours, days, maybe weeks afterwards. So you're going to make it not knowing the full facts. You could be tired. So actually, you might have been, up all night, or you've been at this managing 16, 20 hours a day, limited sleep, and you're almost getting like decision fatigue, but you've got to make that decision. There's always that kind of commanders will always tell you, especially for military, the loneliness of command. In the end, you're looking at the incident team leader, the crisis leader, the CEO, the general. Right, sir, what decision are we going to make, or what decision are you going to make? And that loneliness of command is to say you may have to make some really difficult decisions, which may have some really big impacts on people. And it is your decision to be made, and you can't duck it. Even like this on the furlough decisions that bosses are making at the moment may be obvious, but for some of the people that may be a really, really difficult decision to say to a whole load of very loyal staff, to say, actually, I'm really sorry, but I had to put you on furlough at 80% of your pay, and actually if you do the £2,500, then that might be a reasonable amount less than they get paid. That loneliness of command is a difficult decision, but it needs to be made. The scenario is unfamiliar, so you've not trained for it. You could have a plan, but the plan never quite fits the incident. So, the scenarios, you don't know how it's going to plan out. You haven't got a roadmap to take you out of here. So you're sort of slightly making it up as you go along. So there's no kind of definite, if you do this, that will work. And I think the thing is about it, and we'll say with this COVID thing, is to say, all the stuff our government is doing, hindsight will say whether they did the right thing. And I'm sure they did some of the right things, and I'm sure they did a whole load of the wrong things. And the only way they will find out is about it is in hindsight. So it will all come out in the wash. So if you're that senior manager making the decision, sooner or later, you're going to be proved wrong or right. So there are lots of difficulties making decisions in crises. And my next bit is I sort of Googled here, say, bad business decisions, and you get a whole long list. You've seen the kind of clickbait sort of list you get, and on this one, I just picked out a few. So this was one I tried to get a bit more sort of reputable. I think this was from Forbes magazine. It was the CEO magazine. So, but this was my point. Was to say, and you can just read the little bits, but the bit about Mars on the right there is they decided not to sponsor or get involved with the film E.T. And the E.T. when the spawned off and did massive amounts of money, and M&M's got the sponsorship, and they got in massive exposure. Or that bit about Motorola is they sort of slightly slept with their Razor phone, which was very popular. They sat in their laurels, and then kind of Apple and all the first smartphones managed to come in behind them, and the predictable bit was massive share price loss. And so my point from this first thing is to say that business managers make poor decisions even when they have not all the pressure that is on my last slide, that people make poor decisions. And maybe there is the yang of this slide to say, I'm sure I googled to say 20 of the best business decisions people have made. So there is a kind of there is examples of poor business decision making and great business decision making. But my point is here to say, even if you've got all the facts, you're in the cold light of day, you've got all your advisors, you can research the business, you're still going to make poor decisions. So poor decisions are going to be made regardless. So if you're in a crisis with some of the difficulties we've just talked about, it does make it more difficult. I think if we come on to and have a look at, when I talked about sort of decision making in a crisis, this is often what we kind of see as decision making in a crisis. So I was trying to find a kind of decision here which is done by senior managers, or the president here. We've seen it in the films. Sir, do we launch the bombers to go and bomb Iraq, or do we go and launch the nuclear deterrent? And all the generals are there saying, yeah, you've got to launch. And the president, because that's what the film is all about, gets a sort of, I was thinking War Games, that one, and he puts it in the computer, and the computer decides to say that firing off nuclear missiles, there's no winners, so they tell the president not to fire off the nuclear missiles. But I was saying this is more of what people think of sort of crisis decision making. Is a senior manager, it's strategic here, and this is when Kennedy said, we are going to blockade Cuba, and we want the Russians to get rid of the missiles that they've put on Cuba, and we're prepared to risk nuclear war over it. So that is a kind of one strategic, been really, really bad. Could have been life and death. Could be life and death for millions of people if someone fired off some nuclear missiles. But the right decision got made. The right outcomes for the US got made. And so this was a one sort of strategic decision. So that is people's view of what often kind of strategic decision is a bit. But I want to challenge that. I want to challenge that view. And I think the first thing is to say, very few in incidents, that sort of binary strategic decision, I think, is not often very made. What it is, and a bit from my diagram there is a whole series of decisions made, some of which are big, some of which are small, which add up together to a successful outcome. So if you look at my diagram, here, on the right-hand side, you can see sort of failure on the red line, and the top there, successful incident management. The far side, you can see your strategic, tactical, and operational teams, and then the bigger the arrow, the more major the decision is. And what you can see over time is there is a whole series of decisions, some big, some small, but decisions are made at all different levels. And I want to come on to how the decision at a low level can be as influential as a decision made at the strategic level. So what I'm saying here is decision making is often not like our Cuban one, when they make one decision, right, this is what we're going to go, this is the plan, we're going to go for it. It is, in our instant response, is a whole series of decisions, some big, some small, which together add up to successful incident management or failure. And the decisions are made at lots of different levels as well. So I think that one of my points here is sort of the takeaways for you is, don't just tell your incident teams it's one strategic decisions, it's a series of decisions. And I also want to challenge this idea of that important decisions are always made by senior people and unimportant decisions are always made by junior people. And I want to bring in this concept called, which is the strategic corporal. And this was a military term where, if you see there's the axe on Bloody Sunday, so this is 1971, so it's almost like 50 years ago, my maths is right. Now, the decision to shoot, I'm not a great expert in decisions, but the decision to shoot the people on Bloody Sunday was not the UK Prime Minister said to the troops, right, we need to go out and shoot a whole load of people, innocent people. The decision to shoot was done at a very local level by the troops on the ground. So there was no kind of strategic There was no kind of strategic plot or strategic decision which passed down through the ranks to implement the shooting. The shooting was very much a decision taken by the commanders and the soldiers on the ground. Now, if people have a greater understanding, you might come about my view of history. But my point is from this is about the decision making. My point is from this is to say that shooting is still resonating with us today and had a massive impact on the kind of conflict in Northern Ireland and then the peace process, and it is still relevant today when it was the decision was taken down at a very, very low level, but it had strategic implementations. So I think my point here, and I come on to the next slide, is all about this thing about the saying, just because you're senior doesn't mean to me you can make a decision which can have a massive influence. And if we take a couple of incidents here, where Starbucks, this is where the manager threw the two Afro-Americans sitting there waiting for their friend, threw them out and got them arrested. And then there was a massive backlash against Starbucks saying that they were racist, and they had to go through a whole load of processes to deal with that. So that was a manager, and I'm pretty almost certain there was no kind of thing from up high to say, look, if you've got people lurking around in your Starbucks who you don't like the look of, chuck them out or get the police to arrest them. But it was an operational decision. And again, with the guy who was dragged off the plane in United a few years ago, it was security guards who dragged him off. It wasn't even United staff, but that again had a massive impact on the organization. And so I think you have to think about this thing is, operational people can have a very big impact on the organization. So what we need to make sure is operational people are aware of the consequences of their actions. And I'm going to talk about this later about your incident objectives, to make sure that your incident objectives make sure that you're kind of everybody's pulling in the same way. So decision making done at lots of different levels. So if we go through into decision making and we go into management, we see there is lots and lots of models for decision making. And so people say, look, we know this decision making is really important. We know we have to do the right thing, make these decisions. So they have processes for doing it. So this is the process on the left there from JESIP. So this is used by the UK Emergency Services, and this is their process for doing it. So you can see that almost all of these ones are kind of like circular. So you can see you gather the information, intelligence, you assess the risks, your working strategy, you look at your powers, your policies, your procedures. So you take into account all that learning, your thoughts before, whether you're allowed to do, what are your options in terms of your power? So are you allowed to, as a policeman, to do certain things? You're not allowed to do certain things, it's against the law. You do the options and contingencies, you take actions, and you do that kind of OODA loop of plan, do, check, act, or you see what is the effect of your actions, and is your action having the right effect? And if they're not having the right effect, then you need to adjust what you're doing to be able to do that. So what people do is trying to put in place a process to make sure that the best decisions making do. And on the other side, there's the military, and this is at the kind of the more basic infantry, very quick. So you've got a situation, and you ask yourself 7 questions, and that will try and give you some good answers of how you should deal. Maybe you've got an order come on high, then actually that is your process. And if you get at the sort of staff planning level, which I've done, it's a much more complicated process, but it's all about trying to make the best decisions and give yourself all the parameters. So you've thought through all the consequences, you've thought through what all the options are, you've gathered the information to make that decision. So you've got a nice process. So I think what the takeaway from this is that in terms of decision making, it's not about the actual, often if you look at these processes, it's not about when you're presented with all the facts how you decide upon which one to do. Decision making processes like this is all about leading you through the process to gather the information, but it doesn't actually tell you how to make the decision. So you kind of weighed all the evidence there, and it comes out with two decisions which both may be bad. In the end, you need to, as a commander, as you need to, the person in charge, the team leader, need to come down on one side, and you can weigh all the evidence, and all the evidence seems to point to this one, but your gut feel, and I'll come on to gut feels, seems to point to this one, and then I take that decision, and it might be the right decision, even though all the evidence points to the other decision. So there are processes for incident management or decision making, but the actual, once you come to the point where you've got to make the decision still has to be made. So there's some of the military processes. These are some of the sort of decision-making tools. So this is, again, similar. This is more sort of democratized or further down. So if you look at the TODAR, is what pilots get taught. So this is much more at the sort of sharper end of when something bad happens to your aircraft, you need to make a quick decision on what to do, but it gives them a little circular process, so they're thinking through what are the options rather than just instant happen, bam, this is what I'm going to do, thinking through it. The one top right is a kind of very typical decision making, look at all the options, discuss all the options, give some pros and cons for each option, weigh them all up, you come to a decision, then communicate. And the one, the one top left is, again, that's from the old crisis management standard, the ISO crisis management system. Again, you can see there's very similar echoes in all these different decision-making processes. It's kind of a similar circle, going around the circle, and you go around it to make your decisions. So there are decision-making tools out there, but it's about the process, not about the final decision. I think also one of the issues we have as, say, civilian amateur people is we don't have the time and the training that professional decision makers have. So if you look at the military and the military decision making, so if you're a staff trained, you may go to staff college, I don't know, 6 months a year. So I expect probably 6 months. So you go for 6 months training to be able to make staff decisions and learn to do staff work. So you've got training there. You've got actually, and then so you're going to exercise, so you're going to actual time practice, and your exercises is not kind of like 3 hours once every 3 years. It is lots and lots of exercise. You may go and exercise for 3 weeks to practice this, so you get lots of exercises there. And you've also got to support yourself. You've got a process, so you've got to, whenever an order comes down, if a situation presents itself, you have a good, robust process which is tried and tested, which works because it's been honed over years and years and decades and of centuries of sort of military training. So you've got a good, robust process, and you've been trained in it and you've practiced it. You've got standard operating procedures. So if you need to do something, you don't need to think about how to do it. So in the military, if you want to cross a river, there is a way of building a bridge. So you don't need to go and say, oh, how am I going to build a bridge, and what do I need to do? What do I need to think about it? There is the package. So you can open that package and say, right, or your troops are practicing, this is how we do crossing a river. So it's all there. You don't need to have any thought. You just need to put the parameters in. How wide's the river, and what the bank's like, and all that sort of thing. How fast flowing is it? And then you've got a process for doing it. So you've got your SOPs, and you've got your doctrine as well, so that you're kind of this is the way you think about different events. So you've got a sort of parameters. You've got to say, look, when we go into this sort of environment, these are the things we need to think about. So that is honed, that is developed, that is over years experience. The only thing different to the military is quite often they may go into an environment which is unfamiliar. So if they're going to deal with COVID, they're unfamiliar with COVID. They're going to look at Ebola. If they go into Iraq, or they go into Yemen or Somalia, they don't really understand the environment because they're not necessarily worked in that environment before. So that is the military's got all that system, but they're not maybe always familiar with the environment. But if you look at our civilian decision-making process, first of all, you've got your training. So you might get trained every 3 or 4 years. Chief executives may do some incident management training, but they're not going to do 6 months. So they'll do a bit of training and they'll do an exercise. So they'll do three hours a year if you're really lucky. I work with some clients who do an exercise every 5 years and they want it in an hour and a half, or sort of an hour and a half exercise time. And you kind of, well, how do you learn in an hour and a half every 5 years? So there's really limited training and limited exercise time. So one of the points is you can't have a sophisticated process for making decisions and going around decision-making loop, because no one will understand what it does. And I've seen a lot of sort of maybe other consultants who've tried to use sort of slightly bastardized the police version, the JESIP one, and trying to make this into a civilian license, sort of dumb it down a little bit, which, yeah, is fine. But often even the sort of wording is too complex. And so I think, you need to have something that chief executives can pick up on the day and say, yeah, that makes sense to me. I can conceptually understand that straight away. And I don't need to have, 3 months, 6 months training and lots of practice how to do it, because I don't have the time. And most organizations, you can see in the sort of UK Cabinet Office, and then I got doctrine, but most organizations do not have doctrine of how they manage incidents, and some guidance there. We might have some plans, so that's good. We may not have SOPs because actually we haven't been sort of doing this often enough, and we don't have enough developed incident SOPs. May have some SOPs. We may have some processes. So we may have, pandemic plan, or we may have a product recall plan, or we may have a sort of crisis communication plan. So we may have plans or processes for dealing with the incident, but what we don't have is often the plan never quite fits the incident. So, with COVID planning, I don't think I've heard anyone who put their hands up and said, yeah, my pandemic plan was brilliant and it anticipated everything we're doing at the moment, and just we're really set. People have basic pandemic plans, and this situation is different. So you always need to change your processes for the day. The advantage that us, the civilians, might have is the environmental understanding. So you may not understanding the incident landscape, but at least if you are dealing in an industry, so you're dealing with an incident, you ought to understand who are the key stakeholders, what's the nuances there, what is the reputational type issue, what does the regulator feel, because you live, work, and in this industry. And your staff have got years of experience of making window seals, or doing financial transactions, or running a shop, or whatever the disaster is. So that is the advantage you do, is you intrinsically ought to know, maybe not in a disaster situation, but at least you have an in-depth understanding of the industry, your own capabilities, and what's happening. So in decision making, we're going to have a decision making process. We need something reasonably simple because we don't have, the police do lots of training there. The fire brigade does lots of training. If you're a professional emergency planner, you might have done a lot more training than, our incident team members. So we need to, we're using a decision-making process. It's going to be quite nice and simple. This is coming on to making the actual decision. So what I kind of looked about is to say is, how is decisions actually made? And this is the best sort of model I've come across, and I'm happy for people in the chat saying there's any other better model. But I like this model, and what this model is, recognition prime decision making model. And what this is a bit of psychological work is to say, and it's slightly the bleeding obvious, but it says that people with experience and people with experience of incidents make better decisions than those without. So what it is saying is something around of what you learn over time helps you to make better decisions against someone who may be cleverer, maybe sort of better educated than you, but doesn't have the same real life experience, is going to take poorer decisions. And what they looked at, military people and fire and police, I think, and what they looked at is they got them to make a whole load of decisions, and they looked at the inexperienced people and the much more experienced people. They looked at giving them a whole load of situations, see whether they took the right decision. And there was a kind of whole science around that, because that makes it sound a bit glib, but there's whole science around about it so that there was some right decisions. And what they're kind of, the way they saw it is people with experience look at a situation and basically almost instantly are saying, have I been in this situation before? Do I recognize this situation? Or have I been in a similar situation? They then weigh up and say, and this is all happening in nanoseconds, what did I do last time? Did it work? Or, what did I do last time? It didn't work, so I need to do something different. So they're assessing the situation. They're running it against in their mind, their database of experience. They're saying, look, I recognize the decision. Last time I did that, really worked out well, so we're making that decision. So this is quite maybe good for us as consultants or business continuity people, because what you can go and say to people, say, yeah, we can have a nice decision-making process, but you are going to take better decisions if you come on my training or you come on my exercises, because, all right, if you have lots of incidents, you can build this up, or you've got a lifetime of doing lots of different jobs and being involved in incidents, yes, but actually exercising can help give that almost muscle memory of incidents, so that people can go and your incident team go and say, look, we did that in an exercise and we were told it didn't work and it was obviously a bad idea. So basic from the feedback and actually the way the exercise matured, so I don't want to do that. Or, that is the solution because we did that in exercise and that seems to be the result. So I think there isn't for us a golden bullet and say you can have a nice process making a decision, but in the end, and you can have some wraparound things that can kind of guide you, but in the end, your decision comes down to either your sort of recognized crime, or it comes down to maybe, well, recognized crime is experience. So, or maybe you're just lucky, you're good at making decisions and you can recognize it. So that is how the decision is made. And I kind of say, I think that's a good tool. You can read more about it, but thinking about, pushing your senior manager so that if you get exercises, you're going to do better decisions because you're building up that muscle memory and you're building up that bank of experiences as incident management. I think one of the other things is you need to do is to have a look at so this is coming on to giving yourself the sort of framework for decision making. And I think one of the things you need to do is to think about your objectives or your strategic intent. Now, it's funny, I put this on LinkedIn yesterday and I said, can anyone give me their objectives for COVID or their strategic intent? Because as part of sort of incident crisis management, you should feel at the beginning of the incident state, what are our strategic objectives? What are we trying to achieve? And then that should be sent out through the whole organization so everybody is going in the same way. And this is an example I used to train, it's not a real example, but you can see here that our number one objective is prevent any further injury, ensure staff well-being. And the example I use is to say, actually, you know, you've got an incident and you have one building and there's a whole load of laptops in that building because everyone leaves them at home. And to do your recovery, you need to have, you really need those laptops because it's going to take you 2 weeks to recover. If you can get if you have to buy new ones, you can instantly recover if you go into the building. Now, if you have this as your incident objective, then it is plain to all staff to say you shouldn't go into that building and rescue the laptops because the building could collapse on you or you could get injured, so you're not to do it. If you don't have the incident objective, some person may think, actually, FM manager might say, look, I'll take a risk because I'm doing this for the company and it will help our company. And I don't mind putting my own self at risk because I don't think it's going to happen. So I'm happy to, you know, put my life at risk to rescue the laptops. So, and that's what I talk about, the decision making, the operational decision making can have a big impact. So, and you can see that we're always going to meet our regulatory requirements. This was for an incident where, you know, maybe it's in February and it's a regulated organization and it needs to produce its annual figures. So you want to say, look, one of our key bits is to produce those figures. So we want to keep confidence in the market. We don't want people to sell all our shares. So that's why priority given at the end of the year. You say financial mistakes not seen as a barrier, so you can spend as much money as you want or as require. And we're setting ourselves a target of getting our operations back to normal by 1st of September. So the idea is that set off your strategic intent at the beginning of the incident, and that goes on to all staff. So it gives you a framework, and this is how I saw it, is instead of my other slide with basically all these arrows madly going everywhere, that our objective is almost like corral our decisions, so our decisions are within the same framework, so everybody is pulling together to get to the same end, as opposed to actually different people might think different ends of this incident. So actually what their objectives, which they think the crisis team want, might be different to what the actual crisis team want. So I think if you're going to be building this, you need to, at the beginning of the incident, write your objectives there. I think you also, that in many of our organizations, we might not have a doctrine of the way we do things, but I think in all organizations we have a credo or a statement of beliefs or aims which guide someone's actions. So we have a culture, values, we may have written values, we may have the way our business portrays itself. So I think what is very important in an incident is we take decisions with that in mind, so that we don't, you know, if we're a nice cuddly company and we're always very customer centric and we go the extra for our customers, and then in an incident we treat our customers badly, then that goes with our culture. And, you know, people say, well, is that the real nature of the country? They always portray themselves nice, fluffy, and very customer centric. They're not at all. You know, my belief in this brand or the belief in this country has been betrayed, and I don't like that, so I'm going to go elsewhere. And we can see there, you know, these are some of the credos, the purpose, the culture of different organizations. So in terms of instant decision making, we need to know what our objectives are. We need to also make decisions taking into account our value, purpose, and culture, because those are going to should down on our under. I put Ryanair there because no one there it says we're going to be we're going to look after our customers first, we're going to value choice and care. But you know, Ryanair is what Ryanair is, and you know, if they treat their customers badly, we'd almost expect that. But if you're a premium brand airline, you treat your customers badly, you don't expect that. So you need to do it your decision in line with your purpose and culture. I think also this is just a sort of model here, but I think we also have to, as part of our process, is we need to have this idea of SPONS. So we need to have generic plans for dealing with any incident. So we need to have an incident team and roles and responsibilities and calling them up and all those sorts of roles. And then this bit of recover here, I think we need to have, and most of you will have this, is contingency plans for specific events. So our pandemic plan looks very different to our cyber project recall plan, to our cyber plan, to maybe our kidnap plan. They're all different sorts of plans, and they are dealing with specific incidents. So as part of your risk assessment, you need to have contingency plans for specific events. So that's one of the other third bit you need to have. And then you need to have a decision-making process. So this is the one we teach, and in a form it's going to be, I suspect, in the new crisis management standard, the 22361. And basically it's similar to all the other ones we've seen on this thing, but it's a little bit more simple. So you have the situation there, and you're looking at what is out there, what are the events, attitudes of people, what's the media and social media, what are our risks, what are decision points, impacts of action. So we're looking at what's happening. So we do the situation. We then get together in our team and we share information, we manage information, we try and understand the information we've gathered, we make decisions, and then we allocate actions. We then go out and do those actions or pass them down to different teams. And then we look at our actions and say, have they had the desired effect? What is new in the incident? What are they saying? What's the regulator saying? And then we go around. So I think we all need a decision-making process. I think what we need here is a nice simple one, which people can pick up and say, yeah, this seems to make sense. And what you can teach is what happens in each of the actions, but it's not mega complex so that people can get kind of lost in the process, and it's not doing the desired effect of giving us a picture in which we can weigh up the options and then we can use our decision-making process. So this is what I saw as my sort of solution to this decision making for us in organizations which don't do this for a living. It doesn't look beautiful, so I need to work on the aesthetics there, but we've got our kind of situation, action, direction. And if you look at this model, it's not very difficult, it's quite simple, it's not very difficult from lots of the other models. So we're all around the same place, but to drive this, we need to have our objectives. So we need to set our strategic intent. We might want to move the strategic intent as the incident comes on, but if you can kind of write it quite well, maybe strategic intent can do for the whole incident. We need to take into account our credo, our values, our purpose, our culture, and we always need to keep that in mind when decision making, because that might help inform our decisions. We've got our contingency plan. So, you know, we've got some plans. So if we have a plan for product recall, we want to start, right, there's the product recall plan, there's the steps we need to do. That can give us a sort of pathway for managing this incident. What we need to do with our contingency plan is then think about, does the does the incident fit the contingency plan, or does it need to be rewritten? And if we don't have a contingency plan, do we need to write a plan on the hoof there of the steps we're going to do? And I know a lot of people, if you attended David Hutchinson's thing yesterday, was thinking about the recovery after COVID. So that is, you write a contingency plan, because if you haven't got a very detailed one, then actually that's you starting to write those contingency plans on the hoof. And I think what we need to do in part of our decision-making solution is to think about other teams and making sure that if this is the one for our crisis management team, we're almost taking into account to make sure that the credo, the objectives, and the contingency plans are shared with other teams, so we're all working together, so they're not working off a different plan to different objectives, or not any objectives, because they think they're doing the right thing for them, but it might not be the right thing for the organization. So this is a sort of my thoughts in process, but I think it is so if we come back to the kind of sort of learning there, is that decision making is often not one decision, it's a series of decisions that are being made. The decisions and key decisions may not always be made at the senior level, they can be made at all different levels, and decisions can have a major impact on the incident there. We need a nice simple process for decision making, because the fact is we haven't got the training or the time to do a more complex one. And lastly, we need to have the sort of a solution which works for our organization, and we need to have a process which does it, knowing that the more experience, the actual decision is going to be taken by those, or hopefully taken by those with more experience. So I'm going to open it up to questions there. Any questions there? So let me just open up the questions there. Have we got any questions there? All right. Yusuf, good to hear from you. Yes, hello to you. An observation I made that in my experience is that crisis decisions making isn't practiced enough in some organizations. Greater standards need to be applied. Yeah, I think that's very true. It's my difficulty always with this is, you know, how often will senior managers be able to do this? So how often will they practice that? And then let's take from Mark. At the start of the session, you talked about loneliness command. Surely the whole decision process based on team and not one person, or am I wrong? Yeah, there is the. I think it is that the point is to say this sort of slightly loneliness command is that yes, you can have a team, you can involve the team, but sometimes it might be down to that one person to say, look, boss, sir, whatever you want to call them, you know, there's lots of different decisions, but there's lots of there is a decision to be made, but in the end, you have to do that, and you may have to make some very difficult decisions. We've seen the military one where, you know, sort of say, actually, I know I'm sending people to die on this thing, but I have no option, and that can be a very difficult decision because it's the right decision. But, you know, I think we're making those sort of, when you know there's going to be some severe consequences of your decision, I think that is, you need to know about it. Let's do Louise. How would you recommend balancing empowerment to make decisions, but the awareness of the potential negative impact the decision would make? Yeah, I think in terms of empowerment, I think within your sort of incident hierarchy, you need to be fairly clear what decisions can be made at what level. So what is their authority to make decisions? I think, you know, I think that's why the objectives and the credo for me at least give you a kind of moral compass for those lower down who may not, it may be difficult to try and get that decision made. So so I think, sometimes I think you've got to trust people in the military. You've got to go and trust people lower down and say, look, they've been briefed, they're given the tasks. I now have to trust them because I can't micromanage the battle at that thing. I can't micromanage everybody. So you need to let them do it. But it's difficult. Let's do another one for Yusuf there. Do you agree that comprehensive training program can galvanize the RPD model? I think it's a great model to use in an exercise and training program. To me, we all, whether we're consultants or whether we're internal managers, we all need to sell what we do. And sometimes the customer, our senior managers, are reluctant. And I think if we can use that to say, look, doing an exercise is not just a fun or a drag on your time of, for 3 hours. It is really important that actually you do develop this sort of muscle memory. So I think it is a little bit of how you sell it, to them. Let's do another one for you, there. Do you think Tony Hedward during the deep water should have adopted or with a dedicated crisis management team, considering lessons were identify us? I think the problem is about the Tony Hayward thing is my reading of it. I've got no inside track on this one. Is to say that I think certain, I'm sure he must have had tons and tons of consultants, tons and tons of people who advise him. And I think his results were the bits that did it, his particular utterings, want my life back and all that kind of stuff, were kind of non-scripted. It's almost like the kind of Trump goes off and, most of his stuff, when he does his briefings, he doesn't go to the pre-briefing to make sure everything's scripted. He just turns up and says what he thinks. And so, that can work in some instances, but if you need to be detailed and you need to be very tight on your information and your words count, and you're trying to, this kind of save lives, protect the NHS, you repeat on and on again. So if you have that sort of information, you need to be very tight on that. You need to be tight on the information. So I think that the problem is for us is there's nothing stopping our I was not going to say superiors, our senior managers, just doing things which are just stupid. And I think you can't almost protect yourself against stupidity in senior managers. Is there anything more in that? I think I've done all the questions. Any more for any more?
No, I think we're all good there. I think it's good. Thank you very much. Quick, before I finish a wrap up, do you have anything to say, Charlie?
Yeah, no, what I was going to say is for those of you who missed it, or those of you who think that some of your colleagues would like from this, you can sign back on. I think you can sign back on and get the recording. Or what we'll be doing is putting these on YouTube as well. So there's a YouTube channel with the ones there, so that if you can have a look at it. So there's numerous ways you can see that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thoroughly enjoyed that once again. And thank you also to everyone else for attending. It's nice to see so many of you joining us for these webinars. As Charlie and I mentioned earlier, you'll be receiving a recording of the webinar later today, and this will be emailed to you via GoToWebinar, and it'll be on our website as well. If you have any suggestions of topics for future webinars, please send these across, as we'd love to present any that you are interested in hearing. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you have a great weekend.